Hello, and welcome back to another 3 a.m. production video. This is my attempt at a visual podcast, so while I'm drawing and talking about fun facts and histories of animation, comic book characters, and galore, you can follow along and draw with me or just listen. Feel free to draw along. If you do, please post it in the comments below. I've added the thumbnail for the construction lines in the comments below, so you can download that, print it, and start from there, and we'll go at it together. This week we're going to be talking about Batman versus Superman, but not in the way that everybody's thinking. It's been done before where they duke it out and it's just a fisticuffs match, but I'm going to propose a different kind of versus today of what's the differences in their ideologies, in the way that they think about justice, and how the two can be completely different, but still stand for the same thing. Let's start with the Man of Steel himself, the Blue Boy Scout. I don't know about you guys, but every time I hear his theme, I immediately look to the sky and feel hopeful. After all, Superman is the embodiment of truth, justice, and the American way. You know, being on a small farm in Kansas, Clark Kent grew up learning from his adoptive parents those very ideals, the things that he would become to represent: hope, idealism, the belief in the inherent goodness of humanity, despite him being from another world. Now, whether he's saving the world from ecological disaster or saving a kitten out of a tree, he's always using his superpowers to fight crime and protect the world, and taking more of a proactive approach, believing in a greater good. But it all goes back to that small farm in Kansas, because every time a villain like Lex Luthor clones Superman, that Superman usually doesn't have that humanity that makes him that hero. He just has a lot of power, and power tends to corrupt the Man of Steel without that morality to keep him in check. But growing up on that farm, despite learning all the good things from his adoptive parents, he also was very isolated. You know, he's the only one in the world that can do what he can do, and he wasn't allowed to show it. I mean, his parents taught him a lesson that if he showed his powers, if he showed his gifts, people would reject him for it. So he grew up having to be very secretive. So it's Clark Kent that holds all of those ideas of standing for what's right and doing the right thing, but he wants to be a part of society. So he has to create Superman in order to use his gifts for that greater good. But it comes with a deeply rooted sense of insecurity. It's why he goes the extra mile to save that kitten out of the tree versus just stopping the ecological disasters, because he very well could just sit on his butt and not fly to every kitten stuck in a tree. But he wants to fit in with the world. He wants to be a part of it. He tries to see the best in the world and inspire others to do the same, which is why people like Lex Luthor can take advantage of him, because they know they can manipulate him. Examples: there's a storyline in the comics and in the cartoon where Superman seemingly is up against a president, Lex Luthor, and Lex Luthor has committed a lot of war crimes, and he has a conversation with Superman about how really this is his fault. His inaction to stop Lex Luthor all those years ago had set this in motion. Superman, having that epiphany, decides that he's going to kill Lex Luthor, and he assumes control over the entire world with the help of the Justice League. There's a lot of iterations where if he loses Lois, or Lex Luthor wins in some way where he is now under the thumb of someone, he's not against killing or lobotomizing his enemies. In the Injustice games and comics, the Joker seemingly comes up with a plot to hold a dirty bomb in Metropolis, and also kidnaps Lois Lane and sets Doomsday loose. Well, unbeknownst to Superman fighting Doomsday, Doomsday wasn't actually there. Joker had stolen some of Scarecrow's fear toxin and made him believe that Lois Lane was Doomsday. And so he ended up accidentally killing Lois and his unborn child. That grief sets him over the edge that he's going to assume control over the world, and Batman seemingly goes to odds at him, and his heroes have to pick sides, and it becomes this civil war. But he's very black and white. He's either very gullible, or he's very ruthless. He's hero or villain. There's not a lot of in between for Superman. I mean, when Luthor first became president in that storyline, Superman, although he hated it with every fiber of his being, and all he could see was Luthor as a villain, and Luthor was doing some pretty good things for the economy and the public, but he didn't see any of that. He could only see the bad. He could only see how evil Lex Luthor was. And Luthor was up to plots, so he was right about that. There's several storylines where Superman ends up having to agree with the government just because it's a law, whether he really agrees with it or not. In the New Frontier storyline, he had to sign a loyalty oath to the US government that would only operate as a superhero under certain conditions. A lot of the heroes wouldn't sign it, so they became criminals. In The Dark Knight Returns, something very similar, except it's in more of a future, so it's an older Superman who has basically become a ultimate agent for the US government, going where the US president sends him. to either topple wars before they happen, or perhaps even kill one of his former friends, the Batman, who's causing too much trouble in Gotham City. But it also goes to show how much he's willing to sacrifice his principles to stay within the founding of the people. But with him representing the day, we also have to represent the night. So on the other hand, we have Batman, who embodies realism, vigilance, more of a cynical edge and view of human nature. He believes that justice must be enforced, and that people often need to be held accountable for their actions. And Batman often views Superman's unchecked power as a perpetual threat, but he thinks that of everyone. He has to have a contingency for everything. So while Superman's the big blue Boy Scout, he's actually the Boy Scout. He's prepared for everything. Batman is also the embodiment of stoicism. He believes that he has to control his emotions to achieve a wisdom and shape his own virtues that give him wisdom, courage, and his own sense of justice. He has submitted himself to a life of torment so people don't have to suffer the same tragedy that he felt though. Now, Batman's a much more relatable character than Superman, because it's hard to relate to a guy who can lift up cars and fly on a whim, run super fast. And even though Batman's rich and a little crazy, he took a moment of great tragedy that would break most people, and he set himself the impossible task of never giving up on turning that pain and doing something good with it. He very well could have used his wealth and actually become the Bruce Wayne that we all know, who's just burying himself in alcohol and beautiful women. But instead, he uses that as a persona to hide his habits as the Batman, make him more of an effective crime fighter. Because whereas with Clark Kent and Superman, Clark Kent is the real identity. Without Clark Kent, Superman really isn't a lot of anything. If he gives up being Superman, he is still Clark Kent. He still believes in truth and justice of the American way. Whereas Batman, he is Batman. Bruce Wayne is that three-piece suit of armor that he puts on for the world. Batman lives in a very gray world where, yes, he breaks the law every time he tries to help people, but he believes in fighting fire with fire. But I think both can teach us something about justice and ideals, and that's why they become such good friends. Because when they first meet, they're definitely at odds with each other. Superman doesn't like the way Batman does things. Batman doesn't trust that he won't be a ticking time bomb of power, just waiting to be corrupted and used. But in having to force to work together, they find that both of their ways work. And just because one way is their personal way, they don't necessarily lose sight of the overall goal. They grow to have a respect for each other. They grow to have a respect for one another. I have to admit, growing up watching these two characters, I do like Batman more. I relate to Batman more than Superman, but I still like Superman because I think both characters together symbolize something more hopeful than any one of them separate. Symbolize a more well-rounded view that when they put their mind to it can achieve great thing. That despite their differences, they still work together. They still move past challenges, despite whether their politics are the same, their ethics are the same. And it's that belief that ends up becoming the Justice League. Hope you've enjoyed our little segment of Batman versus Superman. And if you followed along, again, please post in the comments. I'd love to see it. If you like the video, please like and share it. Subscribe if you feel so inclined. I always appreciate that. Hope you all have a good week, and we'll see you next time.